Since I competed in the sock contest but didn't win, I've opted to stay in my stocking feet as I preach. The tie could come off as well. You never know. Our scripture reading today is from the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 3, 1 through 13. And we're all familiar with it. You can read along if you want. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I've seen the burden God has laid upon the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity into the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live. That each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. Well, doesn't that just set the tone? We're all familiar with the first 8 verses of this one. The last part, 9 through 13, you don't see read in church all that often, but it's a pretty decent summary of the first verses. You might even be more familiar with the song released in 1965 by the Byrds entitled Turn, Turn, Turn. Now, even if you aren't old enough to remember 1965, or there was something else going on in your life in 1965 that caused memory lapse, perhaps you borrowed your parents' records or 8 tracks or cassettes and learned to love their music as well. Now, comparing Ecclesiastes 1 through 8 with the song, we find that there is an incredible match. In fact, it's a perfect match, but the Byrds left out parts of verses 6 and 7. That was probably to make the meter of the song work out, but that's the way it was. Nevertheless, the authorship of Ecclesiastes is unknown. It's part of the Old Testament books referred to as wisdom literature. And that goes along with Job, Proverbs, and Psalms. And Ecclesiastes, of course. There have been traditions that assume an author. Judaism traditionally has said that King Solomon wrote the book. But linguistic analysis shows the language used was too modern for Solomon to have written it. So we're left to conclude, because the whole book starts with son of king, son of David, we're left to conclude that the author was an unnamed descendant of King David. Now, let's chat. For several years now, probably going on 15, maybe 20, I've had this niggling to write a book. And the working title for the book is Things I Should Have Taught My Children, The Thoughts of an Old Man. Maybe that's why I haven't done it yet, because I'm just now hitting old man. But it's true. I know that I missed some opportunities to talk to my kids about behaviors and beliefs, good and bad. Caught some. I'm not going to claim that I caught them all. But my point in the book was to accumulate and organize the thoughts about giving children important life lessons, making sure that all the gaps were filled in as best as we could. And upon hearing the birds on the radio, repetitively, it seems, I'm a Sirius XM subscriber, and good songs just keep coming up a little more often. It suddenly hit me that, or how, the book of Ecclesiastes, Father's Day, and my would-be book all coincide with one another. Today's reading is an outline, essentially, for that book, with only some things to add to what Ecclesiastes lists. And if you include the 10 Commandments, well, now you have a pretty complete list. So, as fathers, we share the role of mentoring our children with their mothers so that they grow up to be the best and most productive citizens that we could hope for. To identify their strengths and their weaknesses and to encourage them accordingly. It's not important that they grow up with the same beliefs as we have. What is important, a parental duty, I'd argue, is to teach kids how to assess their experiences and their knowledge to see if it fits their worldview. But we as parents need to give them the tools to live in the world, not of the world. So what shall we teach them? And do I have time to talk about them all? Probably not. I want to start with a few items that aren't on the list of Ecclesiastes. That would be, first, to show respect to all persons by virtue of them simply being a child of God. That's the only requirement. Of course, we should respect our elders and leaders, but I'm talking everyone is a child of God, whether they realize it or not. We're also called to love all. This should also prohibit racism and sexism and any other form of discrimination. Teach them to love and respect all others. Teach them the golden rule. Let's say that together, shall we? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Depending on how you learned it, that last part could be a little bit different, but the first part's pretty much ingrained. It's an approach to remembering to love and respect. It reminds a person how to choose when dealing with another person or a situation. Basically, if it was you, how would you like it to be handled? Now, verses 2 through 8 are all two-line verses. And the two lines are related to one another, although it takes a stretch occasionally. Verse 2 talks about birth and death. Of course, children need to know about birth and death. Feel free to ease into the birth part, but they need to know the finality of life on this earth before they have to cope with friends and family dying. It's a big task. The verse also talks about planting and uprooting. I think the point is planting and harvesting, or birth and death, of others than humans. Teach your children that life is a cycle for all living things, not just us. Verse 3 says there's a time to kill and a time to heal. Topics the Old Testament is just chock full of. We'll skip the kill part, or we'll be here all morning as I give a core lecture on the moral reasons for going to war or not going to war. And the Ten Commandments cover murder. So let's go with the healing side. It could be physical healing or mental healing. If humans are truly God's representatives on earth, then we must heal broken persons, regardless of their condition. Sometimes, obviously, the brokenness is too advanced for us to fix. But we surely can try. Also remember that a person's burdens aren't necessarily obvious on the outside. If we show love and respect to all, maybe we can positively impact persons with hidden issues too. The other half of the verse talks about a time to tear down and a time to build. Is it talking about building homes and sheds? Or perhaps it's describing how we often have to go about healing. Teach your children that healing is often harder than it seems. Verse 4 focuses on sadness. It's going to come to all of us if it hasn't already. There's a time for weeping and a time for laughing and mourning and dancing. Teach your children to enjoy the good times in all of their life experiences and endure the rough ones. Joy will return. I struggled with verse 5. Seems a little disconnected. Gather or scatter stones and embrace or not embrace. But both gather and embrace require closeness. Scattering and not embracing require space. Teach your children when it's appropriate to get close and when it's not, and how to make good choices, physical and emotional. Verse 6 again pairs pretty nicely. Search and keep versus give up and throw away. Search and keep imply things you have or realistically hope to have. Give up and throw away both signify things you don't have. Teach your children to have reasonable expectations of what they may possess, and if things don't come their way, they probably didn't need them anyway. They should also forget the things that are beyond their reach or simply don't fit their sense of person. Verse 7 I found intriguing. Tear and mend make sense, as do silent and speak. They make sense. I think the key in tying the two lines together is that poor choices in speech can be hurtful or offensive or simply said to the wrong people. On the other hand, wise speech can convey love, caring, factual information, not just rumors, factual information, and so on. Teach your children that when in doubt, stay silent. If they speak, let it be in kindness and with knowledge and wisdom. And we're not talking about the banter over a video game. We're talking serious conversation. And finally, verse 8. In the modern world, I don't think there's room for hate. Now, at the time this passage was likely written, somewhere between 450 and 180 BC, that should show you how unknown the authorship really is, the Israelites had been fighting for survival. They've been treated poorly by their captor nations. Maybe they earned the right to hate. But let's not forget ongoing conflict in the world. I'm still going to maintain that no hate is a glorious goal. Teach your children that peace and love go together in the home, the community, the nation, and the world. The Byrds ended their song like this: a time for peace, I swear it's not too late. I hope they're right. As for the Ten Commandments, well, they come from Exodus 20, verses 1 through 17. Some are absolute no-brainers. We accept them as a matter of faith. There's only one God who will not tolerate images of or worship to any other gods. That sounds like a no-brainer to me. And we shouldn't misuse his name. And that's probably a deeper statement than simply don't swear. For example, he's simply saying something like, God made me do it. We've all said that. Is giving God credit or blame for human choices. Teach your children to take responsibility for their choices, good and bad. And to not take credit for others' work or place blame for their own errors on others. Be honest. Honor your father and mother. That's half the point of Mother's Day and Father's Day. If you've lived through children's teen years, you know this is a fleeting occurrence. But know they will come back to you as they realize the lessons you tried to teach them are all valid. Teach your children that the love of family is always available, regardless of their age. We have a daughter in her 40s that finally discovered that half of the lessons we gave her were right on, and she needed to get control of our granddaughter. The remainder of the Ten Commandments are straightforward enough. Don't steal, don't murder, don't lie, don't covet, that means want to possess, things and people that don't belong to you. Now, since Exodus and Ecclesiastes were written, the world has certainly changed. I think most of the changes were good. The wheel, whoever put together the first boat, architecture, the discovery and harnessing of electricity, modern electronics, safe drinking water. We take safe drinking water for granted. There are places in the EU where you can still get parasitic diseases from the water. We could have a spirited discussion on how crucial these advances are, but we have to recognize they're all here to stay. Does the evolution of human culture change our understanding of today's reading? I don't think so. The modern world gives us a new context compared to the time the readings were written. But the lessons are still important, maybe more important for us today. Basically, The ways of thinking and the ways we can misbehave or behave are the same. We just have more options for showing our values and behaviors. We drink alcohol. So did Jesus. Why? Probably safe water. Safer than water. We all have to figure out that ballet of learning about sex. We can find cave drawings and ancient artifacts explicitly depicting all kinds of behaviors, good and bad. Then we invented the printing press. Not long after that, we had erotic literature. So we didn't have to scribble it on a cave wall anymore. What it did it increased access to that material. It didn't create the material. Then came the famous French postcards with veiled nudity shots on them. And here we are with sexually explicit movies and videos. So we've made these kinds of materials and behaviors more accessible, and that's all. In other words, we haven't changed the sins. They are the same. Our choices to sin, though, might be more public now. It's irrelevant that young people seem to prefer Instagram, X, and TikTok, and us older folks tend to prefer Facebook. We tend to share more of ourselves on social media, since many of the readers seem faceless and anonymous. You've got to teach your children to be careful not to expose too much of themselves in general and specifically on social media. They don't want to seem foolish by telling the world that they're out of town, which increases the chances of theft, or what they had for dinner. I do not want to see pictures of people's dinner plates, before or after. I just don't want to do that. Post photos of your adventures after you've gotten home. No beer cans, no red Solo cups, because you know trolls thrive on gathering personal information. That's okay. So do potential employers. They're all over your social media. Teach your children to finish school to as high a level as required by their dream job. That might be a certificate, might be high school. Associate's degree, bachelor's, all the way up to PhD. Your dream job, what does it require? Stay in school to qualify. I mean, why settle for easy now when they can set their sights on where they want to go? That only leaves sexual ethics. I'm not going to do a heck of a lot with that because it's pretty dangerous. This includes sexual assault, attempted sexual assault, and just plain toxic environments. But it also reflects respect. Teach your children, especially the girls, that their bodies and minds are theirs and no one else's. They should be careful of situations they'd be safer to avoid. And always remember, no means no. After that, you're on your own for figuring out how to develop relationships. This has been a pretty complete list, if you think about it. Though my book would likely have a few more, but I think I've hit the essentials in my outline. To summarize is easy, though. Really easy. Be good, do good. Love all, respect all. Be smart about choices made. Be careful exposing more of ourselves than we should. Be content with life and only gather what is reasonable for our needs. Help all those in need. And admittedly, sometimes prayer is all we can give. And that's important too. There you have it, the ramblings of this old man. I hope it made sense. It did in my head. And I hope I gave a basic set of what I think we owe our children that is fully in sync with the Bible. You certainly added to the list those of you who have interacted with children or raised them. Good. Mine isn't an exhaustive list, and of course you need to tailor what you teach your children in your own environment. But it's a start. We owe our children so much. Most importantly, the tools to navigate life. Let us all do our best when dealing with children. They're sponges. They will notice. Keep that in mind, fathers and mothers. Pray for all children. Show them kindness. Make sure they know that your house is a safe house. And reinforce to them the lessons they should be learning. After all, they are the beneficiaries of the world that we leave to them. Amen.